Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel, and this week I wanted to do a continuation video of Custer's Last Stand from Worthington Games. I did an unboxing video a few weeks ago and I was exceptionally surprised to see the number of viewers of the video. It's obviously something that really appeals to people out there. I thought it was only right to take that a step further and do a bit of an overview of our first game with some thoughts and ideas around it from my perspective. Again, I'd like to welcome all those new subscribers to the channel. It's great to see numbers going up. Please tell anyone you know about the channel who may have similar interests. Obviously, by increasing my numbers, it gives me a chance to bring you new content and keep the channel community going, which is great. I really appreciate your feedback and comments. But without further ado, let's talk a bit about Custer's Last Stand. So we had our first game. I'm going to post some thoughts around that shortly, but I just really wanted to talk about the game itself, how it operates, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and just some sort of final thoughts before I talk you through our game. So Custer's Last Stand, I would say, is an average medium sort of complexity game, war game, hex encounter, but big hexes, nice big counters, beautiful map, lovely artwork, as you always get with Worthington. Rules are very simple, only a few pages long, nothing too complicated. We didn't play the advanced or additional rules. Probably could add a few of those in next time. They didn't detract from what was a very exciting and fun game. We really enjoyed it. I played the cavalry forces, my friend played the Indians, and there was this kind of feeling as the cavalry player that you were going to literally get overwhelmed at any moment. You felt outnumbered from the outset. You felt you were always fighting against the odds. Even though you were able to pick off units here and there, you always felt that if the Indians could come together and get a weight of numbers against you or surround you, that you were very, very vulnerable. And that's what transpired in our game. I really like the mechanics. It's a chip pull system, and the activations are governed by the chip pull. So the Indians and the cavalry will have a certain number of activations per turn in the pot, and as they pulled out, you go. Once you've done your activations, that's the end of the turn. The Indians start off that a bit slower and gradually get more powerful as the game goes on, as more units, tribes can get involved, and the cavalry stay fairly static throughout. You start just with Custer, then Reno comes into play, then Benteen, and then you play from there. The victory point conditions are quite interesting. So as the cavalry player, it's all about really trying to get those villages taken down, get in amongst the tents, destroy as much of that as you can to reduce the effectiveness of the tribes. Actually taking out Indian pieces doesn't really add a huge amount of victory point value, and for the Indians it's just about taking us out really, and again the overwhelming aspect of the tribe numbers really comes into play in the later activations of the turns, where more and more of these tribes are activating at the same time, and so they can start to operate in conjunction with one another, and that became a real issue for the cavalry as the game went on. The map is a good size. It does offer various routes. I played the game having watched a video following very similar tactics just to see how it played. Learning game, so swept around the top, tried to make a big flanking movement, went very badly wrong. But it's given me some ideas about maybe how I would try and play it differently next time. I think the tendency is you either condense your units into big blocks. You can only have 2 units in a hex anyway, so there's not big stacking rules in this game, which I like. But as the cavalry player, you felt a little bit restricted by the command radius of 5 hexes, particularly with Custer, who's got some Crow scouts with him, and I really wanted to send them off on a wide flanking arc movement on their own, but I just couldn't do that because of the limitations with the command. The Indians don't have any of that, so they can pretty much swan off and do whatever they want. They're not beholden to any kind of command and control friction element. So that's probably the hardest part I found as the cavalry player, was those limitations on what you could do when you felt that you needed to be able to split and spread off things to try and pull the Indians apart a little bit, and it was very difficult to do that. The fords, the woods, the coulees, they all provide very good defensive modifiers. One of the rules I particularly like is the dismounted rule. So if you're dismounted, you get a benefit in combat whether you're attacking or defending. The cover only comes into play if you're dismounted and defending. So that was quite an interesting dynamic, particularly as the cavalry player. Where you're doing a lot of the attacking, you had to think very carefully about whether to stay mounted, where you could move that bit quicker, or to dismount, which gives you a little bit more defense but slows you down in terms of trying to get in amongst the Indians. And that's a really tricky compromise and balance, because if you stay mounted too long, you become more vulnerable, really. But at the same time, you do need that speed to try and make things happen as quickly as you can in the game before the Indians become too powerful. So there's a really nice blend and balance there. And again, it's all about your choices. When Reno and Benteen come into action, that sort of opens it up a bit more, and suddenly the Indian players got quite a lot more to think about. It's going to take them a little while to get to where they need to get to, probably 2 or 3 turns if they're not contested before that. So the Indian players got time, but they're strong enough forces that an Indian player is going to have to deal with them as well as Custer. But hopefully, if they've managed to get the villages moving quick enough, they could still be quite a way off at that point. So there's some really good things in there. As I say, there's some additional rules which we didn't use, which will add some more chrome historical flavour to the game. And we haven't played Rosebud Creek yet, which again looks very interesting, with the addition of things like infantry and miners, etc. So we're looking forward to that. The only thing I would say that we came up against in the game that we couldn't find an answer to, and we made our own interpretation of, and I looked at Board Game Geek as well, was around loss of a commander. In this case, when Custer was killed, he was already surrounded by Indians. Now, according to the rules, the command continues just without Custer, and for command and control purposes, i.e. these 5 hexes, it still applies. But what didn't feel right to us was that you'd still have a command base sitting surrounded by Indians, giving a command radius 5 hexes out to a unit that was 5 hexes away. So we took the view that that's then moved to the nearest friendly unit within that force, and the commander then is with those troops, i.e. we took the view that there would be a second or third in command who would be with the other force, who would be told to take over if Custer was killed. If anyone knows the actual answer to that question, be very helpful for you to post that in the comments, but that was our interpretation. In terms of things I didn't like with the game, I've got to be honest, there was nothing I really didn't like. The quality of the production is good. I've seen some people moan a little bit about the silhouette pattern on the counters, and I know There are some other games out there. I think Legion have a Bighorn game. The counters are absolutely beautiful artwork, and if we could have had that artwork on these, it would have been even better. But to be honest with you, I've got Dawn of Battle from Worthington, which has very similar silhouette artwork. I think it works well. Don't think it's a problem. Um, what I liked about the counters was the colours that we used were very vibrant, and you could see it very clearly on the table, particularly for the Indians with the different tribe colours as well. That was really good. So I think that's a small thing that, to be honest, was not an issue for me, but I understand for some they perhaps would like that more intricate artwork on their counters. The map's beautiful. At first appearance, it looks like very simplistic, but as you'll see in a moment, actually, there's quite a lot of hidden terrain features in there that do really play a part in the game and your thought process. The mechanics I really like, as I say, with the chip pool. I like the fact that the villages are really important from the Indian player to protect those. Always a worry in the back of their mind that if they lose the villages, they lose their tribes, and then they become much weaker. Obviously, they're dealing with reinforcements coming in from the right-hand side as well, so that's always an issue for the Indian player to deal with. And for the cavalry player, it's that sheer weight of numbers that's always playing and nagging in the back of your mind. If you don't get the right roll of the dice at the right time with combats and activations, you are in all sorts of pain very quickly. And that's what happened to me. A couple of really crucial aggressive combats that I went in for, and I rolled really poorly, and they were fairly close fights, and as a result I lost quite heavily. And as soon as the attrition starts to kick in, the cavalry are really in trouble. The Indians perhaps can soak that up a little bit more. The cavalry cannot. So as the cavalry player, you've really got to harness your troops and pick your fights very carefully and don't get surrounded. But let me share a little bit more of my thoughts from our specific game. But overall, I give Custer's last stand a very big thumbs up, and I think Worthington have done a great job with it. But I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. So I just wanted to share with you how our game panned out, what sort of happened, how the game runs along. You'll see on the map at the bottom here, you've got a turn track. Just turn that down there. So you've got 15 turns in this little Bighorn scenario, and you'll see you've got an active cavalry track down here with Custer, Reno and Benteen, and then you've got the active Indian units there, and on the track you will see in the blue and the brown the number of cavalry activations in a turn and the number of Indian activations in a turn. So basically the Indians start off quite slow to react, and as we get into turn 4 that increases to 2 tribes activating, 3 from turn 7, 4 from turn 10 and 5 for the last 3 turns. The cavalry have 1 for a couple of turns, which is just Custer, and then Reno comes on in turn 3. So you get 2 actions and then 3 actions from turn 6 when Benteen comes into the equation, and have 3 throughout. So pretty much the cavalry will activate every turn, but of course the challenge with this game, because of the chip pool system, is you don't know when they're going to activate and when the Indians are going to activate. And so early on, one of the things I like about this is Custer has 2 activation chits, but he can only activate once, so you have to decide when he's pulled out whether you go or whether you wait and hope that the next one will be pulled out before anything else happens. Obviously in the early turns it's very difficult for the India player, because he's only got one tribe that will activate. So his main strength is positioned in this area here, where you've got the villages for all the tribes. So you've got the Blackfoot, the Sanzark, the Cheyenne, the Oglala, the Mini Conju, and the Hungpapa. They're all based in the Bighorn Valley here, and so they have to set up with their villages, the teepees, and they have to be within certain limits of those teepees, each tribe. So you end up with a mass of Native American Indians in this area here. Custer starts over here, in between these two ridge lines. So he's got quite a nice quick movement over to this flank. But as soon as he hits either the ridge lines or the coulees, these deep ravines, that's going to slow him down. So early part of the game, we saw Custer sort of move across here into a flanking movement quite quickly. The Indians kind of, fortunately, and this happened a trend pretty much throughout the game, were able to activate some of the key tribes that were up this end of the table and get them up onto some of the key ford points, crossing points here and here, and ensure that Custer couldn't get across uncontested. As the game developed, the Indian tribes, the key Indian tribes that the Indian player needed, actually happened to activate pretty much at the right times. The only tribe that didn't was the Cheyenne, and they had quite a large grouping up here, and at a critical point in the game, the Cheyenne were really badly needed, and they just would not activate in a given turn, because the Indian player doesn't have a choice. As the tribes are pulled out, he has to activate them until he's used up all his activations. So you had scenarios where you wouldn't always get the tribes that you wanted being activated. However, there was quite a number of fights going off in the coulees around here and in the ravines here, and it was fairly even Stevens. There was casualties to both sides. Custer manages to get across and into the back here of the Indian area about the time that Reno has arrived down in the corner of the table here and has started to head across the fjord into this area. However, he was abruptly stopped by the Hunkpapa and Sitting Bull coming down here in large numbers, and a big fight started to break out here with Reno coming off worse and was pushed back across the ford into a defensive sort of position, with the Hunkpapa sitting there watching, whilst the rest of the tribes stormed up here and started to overwhelm Custer's command further up the table. As I say, Custer at this point had just managed to come across and had attacked his first village and taken one out, a Cheyenne village of all, and was trying very desperately to get to the final Cheyenne village. Is again one of the nice mechanisms in this game for the cavalry player is that if you can take out the villages for a particular tribe, that whole tribe is then removed off the table. So the Cheyenne up here in big numbers, the Indian player was getting very worried about losing those at quite a critical part of the game. But Custer lived up to his reputation and probably over-advanced himself. Strong force that he had, what he didn't have was any flank or rear support, because they were stuck behind ford in these coulees and ravines, and he got surrounded by all sides due to, again, some fortunate tribe activations at key points and some very, very poor dice rolls from the cavalry player, i.e. myself. Nothing unusual there. And as a result, Custer's command went down under a blaze of glory. And again, one of the key rules that plays to the Indian advantages they can get in that position is that if you surround an enemy and he's got nowhere to withdraw to, then they take extra casualties. And of course, as they get weakened, they got whittled down to the point only Custer was left, and then he got killed as well. So at that point, we had two skeleton forces, the Scouts and another company up here, and Reno suddenly been supported down in the corner here by Benteen with quite a large force. Made 3 or 4 counter-attacks against the Hunkpapa, all to no effect, with some, again, classic dice rolling, to the point they then got forced back over again and decided to gradually retire off the table. Benteen left with his force intact, and he left Reno defending the ridgeline on his own, and Reno was eventually surrounded and destroyed as well. Meanwhile, up top, the cavalry threw caution to the wind and sent the Crow Scouts further around, hoping to get round behind the Cheyenne and maybe make one last bid to stop the villagers getting off the board here, but to no avail, and they got overwhelmed and destroyed as well. So first game was a comprehensive win for the Indian player, but we had a thoroughly enjoyable game. There's lots of tactics and ways to play this game, I feel. Certainly I'll be trying different routes in the future. I think the terrain is subtly quite difficult in places. It's a very clever map, because when you look at it as you are here, it doesn't look too difficult to understand, but when you start to play on it, you realise there's some interesting terrain types in there that for both sides can be a hindrance or an advantage. I think the key learn for the cavalry player was try not to get your commands surrounded, because once they are, there's really only one outcome. And for the Indian player, it is very much about keeping those villages intact. If the American player, the cavalry player, had maybe, in my case, better dice rolls, possibly some of those villages could have been taken out quicker, which would have reduced the strength of the Indian forces, and maybe, just maybe, would have given Custer and his command a chance. But excellent game. We played it through in about 2 hours once we'd set everything up. So it moves along really quickly. That was a full 15 turns, and that was a learning game as well. So I think now we know how to play it, it would move along even quicker. But we definitely want to get this one back out on the table. And of course, we'd like to try the other scenario in the game, which is the Rosebud Creek battle as well. But as I say, I think it's a super game, one you should have on your wish list if you've got any interest at all in this period. It's a challenging game, but it's also a fun game. We had quite a few chuckles as different events happened, which were very Hollywood. And as I say, history repeated itself on our game on Friday. But I hope you've enjoyed this brief overview of Custer's Last Stand from Worthington. I highly recommend it. I've really enjoyed playing it. It's a great game. It's a simple game. It's got some great mechanisms, some great ideas. It's visually attractive. The counters are good size, and it plays through really quickly. So if you want a taste of this period, Custer's Last Stand from Worthington, well worth a look. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and see you all again next time.